shot heard around the world today was
next to the Bible. I'm going to put it right here then. Underneath all this.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to St. Bernard's Church here of Holy Family Parish in Concord. I'm Father Frank Silva, the pastor of this Catholic faith community, and believe me, it is a true delight to welcome all of you here tonight for a very significant event, I feel. For one thing, we know that it is part of kicking things off for Concord's 250th, and for our parish community here to be honored by beginning these events in this very historic building means a great deal to our parishioners, and I would hope to all members of this community in Concord. When I refer to this structure as an historic building, I've just discovered in recent times just how historic it is, and I believe with some of the stories that we'll be hearing here tonight, that will be enfleshed, and you can appreciate, again, the significance of what gathers us here. Not too many of us get to go to a birthday party for someone who's 200 years old, but I think in the spirit of what the woman whom we honor here tonight in a particular way gives us, we realize the message that she lived out and certainly remained true to throughout her lifetime is a message that continues to be needed to be heard by communities far and wide, not only within our own town, within our state, our country, but for that matter throughout the world. So again, not only in my name, but on behalf of all our parishioners here of Holy Family Parish, I welcome all you here tonight, and I'm delighted that you were able to join us. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Nikki Turpin, and on the behalf of Robin's House, I want to thank everyone for being here today to celebrate Ellen Garrison Clark's birthday. I kind of sat all month when we knew definitely this was happening, trying to figure out what was I going to say. Who was I going to talk to? Who was I going to inspire by this story, Ellen's story specific? And I realized I didn't really have to do much because Ellen is inspiring on her own. And I just had to be present and still and ready to share what I love with you. So I thought I'd take a moment as we welcome each other in this space to discuss how 10 years ago I was in a really dark space, as I think many of us were in this country. And I needed someone to inspire me. And I needed that someone to tell me that it was gonna be okay. And to tell me that by saying, this is hard work and you gotta keep going. And I think that that's what Ellen does every time I read something that she's written, every time I think about her presence in this community, is that that struggle is real, but you have to keep going because it's worth it on the other end of it. And as an educator, I'm inspired by her seeing that her purpose and the way to change is through education. We cannot really let that go. It's something that every single person needs every day, and if you think you know it all, you just don't. You gotta keep going because there's more to learn, right? So with today being her birthday, something I always think about on my birthday is, what do I want this next rotation to mean? And what I challenge you to think is, how does this rotation and your association now with Ellen change who you are, and what do you want it to mean as you keep going for these next 365 days?
Thank you, Nikki. Good evening. My name is Joe Palumbo, and I'm a member of the Robin's House team, and I work for the town of Concord as an interpreter in the town. Tonight, we're going to tell you a story. You see the story that we're going to tell? It's really our story. It's the story of our town, it's the story of our nation, and it's the story of the long struggle for civil rights. This nation, built on protest and struggle, has increasingly extended the rights and freedoms for all people. We know that work is not done. Tonight we honor Ellen and all those who stood up, those who spoke out, and their friends and allies who stood with them. First, we're going to join a 1841 meeting in progress here, and hear our young speaker that the town recently invited. Then Jack Garrison, Ellen's father, will introduce us to his daughter Ellen, who will share some more about her journey in both Concord and beyond. Interspersed through this will be selections from the youth choir of the Hamilton Garrison Center for Music and Arts. This is a school that we recently found out about that's quite wonderful and committed to celebrating Black cultural music through formal training and performance. Finally, Sam Williams will honor Ellen and her legacy through the power of spoken word. At the conclusion, please process with us to the townhouse to join us for remarks and reception. Now, I want you to all remember, tonight, as Nikki said, is a celebration. It's not an academic lecture. So get comfortable, join in with laughter, your applause, your joy, as we celebrate Stand Up for Ellen. Are you ready for this? So it's in the middle of the 1800s. The revolutionary events of April 19, 1775 are 70 years in the past. But however, like today, they are a part of how the town thinks of itself, as we do now. Although kidnapping and enslavement of indigenous and African people had continued in Concord for roughly 170 years, by the 1800s, these evil practices had generally ended in Massachusetts. Concord's free black families lived near each other on the edges of town. The Dugans over near White Pond. The Robbins and the Garrison families initially in a small home near the edge of what was known as the Great Field. Today, we would know that as the Great Meadows. The actual home site is near the wastewater treatment plant. I think we're going to get a sign for that. The legal practice of chattel enslavement, the legal right to own another person, however, has continued to explode through the nation during this time. The slave power, as it is called in the United States, has continued to grow. A small but growing group of Americans of all races have begun to organize to continue the long struggle around the idea of abolishing slavery, thus the name abolitionist. In Concord, a small but mighty group of protesters was led to no surprise to anyone by the women of the town. The Concord Female Anti-Slavery Society was founded by women such as Susan Garrison, Ellen's mother, and the strident and powerful personality of Mary Brooks. Susan's father and husband had been enslaved. She knew well what she was fighting for. Mary's father and grandfather had been enslavers, and her disgust with her family's past drove her to take the lead. These women met in homes and found their ways to raise money for the cause. They supported and held fairs and lectures. They stood up, they spoke out, and they pushed, and they did not take no for an answer. They often were not very popular. On an evening such as this, in 1841, in this very building, on this very spot, a grand anti-slavery meeting was held. All of Middlesex County had been invited. Although her mother Susan had passed just a few months before, Ellen and her father Jack would have been at this meeting. Mary Brooks had heard the news of a new young speaker, that she insisted he be at this meeting. She wanted all Concord and beyond to hear him. According to historian Sandra Kurtulaitis, she says about this evening, in 1841, those gathered at the Universalist Church this day are there by a shared outrage that they live in a country that enslaves 2 million people, but considers itself a bastion of liberty. In Concord, this pride in the national story of equality and freedom is, of course, especially strong. Slavery is not only a horrific institution, but it makes a humiliating mockery of the nation's founding principles. Yet we have to remember that the women and the men who are here this night in Concord, although they were an audience composed from folks throughout the town, it attracted only a minority of the residents of the town. So, without further ado, I'd like to begin our program and introduce Mrs. Mary Brooks.
I welcome you all tonight on behalf of the Concord Female Anti-Slavery Society. Miss Helen Thoreau, Mrs. Abba Alcott, join me in our deep affection for the Garrison family, and each day still mourn the loss of dear Susan, Ellen's mother, and her first teacher. When we started our Female Anti-Slavery Society, there were 61 women, including Susan Garrison, with us from the beginning. We have heard some grumblings and words of disdain from some men in town, including my husband. Yes, he thought our group silly. The abolitionist men are somewhat drowsy, but the women are, as usual, wide awake and the life of the cause. The men need to know we are not moving out of our proper sphere as females when we assume a public stand in favor of our oppressed sisters. Years ago, the ladies used to be admonished to leave off the meddling with what did not belong to them and stay home and mend stockings. I always replied, I would be very happy to do so when the men would fulfill their obligations.
Here, Mrs. Brooks, I just wanted to say that Mr. Alcott and I have been in such admiration for you two, and I believe tonight we may have an opportunity to get some of the men folks to help us when we set up for the fundraising fair.
Oh, yes, Mrs. Alcott. Thank you. I have taken care of that and will make note of your advisement. Very well. But there is work to be done, and I pray we women shall do it. We shall make it manifest that the descendants of those who so bravely resisted British oppression in 1775 are not only alive, but awake, too, on the great subject of human freedom. Tonight, there is free speech and a free platform. On behalf, and I had said that tonight, our reform-minded ladies of Concord, I wanted to introduce you to a young man whom I have met this summer past and whose fine speaking is elegant. I said that tonight at this meeting, I wanted young Mr. Douglass to speak and in short feel the infinities of my nature by wishing the whole universe be present. I introduce to you Mr. Frederick Douglass.
I thank my friends here tonight of the Concord Female Anti-Slavery Society, Miss Helen Thoreau, Miss Abba Alcott, and of course, Mrs. Mary Merrick Brooks. And our friends, the Garrisons, Jack and his beloved daughter, Alan Garrison. My friends, I have come to tell you a story, something about slavery. What I know of it as I have felt it. Though many of our abolitionist friends can give you its history and they can depict its horrors, they cannot speak as I can from experience. They cannot refer you to a back covered with scars as I can, for I have felt it. Those who enslave others do not try to hesitate to prove from the Bible that slavery is right. And the ministers of gospel tell us that we were born to be slaves. To look at our hard hands and see how wisely Providence has adapted them to do the labor. And then tell us, holding up their delicate white hands, that theirs are not fit for work. Emancipation, my friends, is the cure for slavery and its evils. How they yearns for it, that he may enjoy his family and no more be tortured by the worst feature of slavery, the separation of friends and families. Oh, my friends, you cannot feel the slave's misery when he is separated from his kindred. The agony of the mother when parting from her children cannot be told. Yet the northern people think that if slavery were abolished, we would all come north. They may be more afraid of the free colored people and the runaway. I tell you, we would seek our home and our friends. But more than all, to escape from the northern prejudice, we would go south. Prejudice against color is stronger north than south. It hangs around my neck like a heavy weight. It presses me out from among my fellow men. And although I have met it at every step, the 3 years I have been out of Southern slavery, I have been able to, in spite of its influence, take good care of myself. Only a few weeks ago, I rode a train car in a nearby town, along with my abolitionist friends. We sat together in a whites-only car, known as the long car. One of the best railroad carriages with luxuriance and beautiful seats. The enraged conductor ordered me out, yet I refused. 6 men were needed to oust me. They clutched me head, neck, and shoulders. But in anticipation of the stretching which I was about to be subjected, I had interwoven myself amongst the seats. In dragging me out on this occasion, it must have cost the company $25 to $30, for I tore up the seats and all. At New Bedford, where I live, as you have here in Concord, the blacks told to sit in a different part of the church to worship away from the whites. It seems the kingdom of heaven is like a net, and when the net was drawn ashore, they had set it down to call out the fish. Well, it happened now that the fish rather had some black scales. So these were sorted out and packed by themselves. During the revival, one young girl went into a trance. When she awoke, she declared she had been to heaven. Her friends were all anxious to know what and whom she had seen there, so she told the whole story. But there was one good old lady whose curiosity went beyond that of all others. And she inquired of the girl who had the vision if she saw any black folks in heaven. After some hesitation, the reply was, "Oh, I didn't go to the kitchen." Such was the religion she had experienced. Thus, you see, my hearers, this prejudice goes even into the church of God. And there are those who carry it so far that it is disagreeable to them to even think of going to heaven if colored people are going there too. And whence comes it? The grand cause is slavery, but there are others less prominent, one of them which is the way in which the children in this part of the country are instructed to regard the blacks. Yet people in general will say they like colored men as well as any other, but in their proper place. They assign us that place. They don't let us do it for ourselves, nor will they allow us a voice in that decision. They will not allow that we have a head to think, a heart to feel, and a soul to aspire. They treat us not as men, but as dogs, and expect us to run and do their bidding. That is the way we are liked. You degrade us and then ask why we are degraded. You shut our mouths and then ask why we don't speak. You close your colleges and seminaries against us and then ask why we don't know more. Well, I tell you tonight, if there is no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet depreciates agitation are men who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its many waters. This struggle may be a moral one, or it may be a physical one, or it may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will.
Yes, and thank you, choir. Thank you. And Mr. Douglass, the truth of your words pain us, but no more so than the truth of your life experience. We have recognized both the truth that you lived and the truth that you now share with us. So we thank you for your words this evening. And good evening. I am Jack Garrison. I am Jack Garrison. I am Ellen's father. And my wife and I, God rest her soul, we share in the upbringing of our daughter. Good evening again. I am Jack Garrison, and I have lived in Concord town for many years now. Having removed myself from the colony of New Jersey, I did take my freedom and come to Massachusetts to live. I met my wife Susan, and as fate would have it, we married, and Ellen is our youngest child. Susan's father, Ellen's grandfather, was Caesar Robbins. Caesar Robbins, too, was a longtime resident of Concord town. And he fought in the colonial militias against the French armies. And later on, he fought with the colonial militias against the British Army in the War of Independence in 1775. He was even one of the men that was paid to repair the old bridge that used to cross the river here in town. So my father-in-law, Caesar Robbins, too, has a long history here in Concord town. It was my wife, Susan, however, that gave Ellen the determination to fight for her rights and the rights of all of us. Susan was active with Mrs. Brooks in the Female Anti-Slavery Society, society which even met in our house in the great field outside of town. It was my wife, Susan, who gave Ellen the schooling she first needed. And as she went to school here in town, Ellen became one of the premier students among the school children here in Concord town. I think Ellen took all of her mother's instructions to heart because she knew what her mother was working for, and she knew and understood what I had been through myself. I remember when she was but 12 years old, her school teacher asked the class, "Who will march in the town parade?" Ellen said no. She said no because her mother had forbidden her to participate in the town parade. For Susan knew that the last time Ellen participated, that she had been crowded out, that she had been pushed around, she had been called names by others. And Susan was not about to let her daughter suffer that mistreatment again. But Ellen persuaded her mother to allow her to attend. And as Ellen had experienced some of the prejudices of Northerners, as Mr. Douglass referred to, she was willing to fight the fight in order to stand up for what she believed in. On the day of the parade, Ellen and one of her white classmates, joined hands and together marched in the town parade. She was standing up for what she believed. The two of them, as they marched, drew some favorable and some unfavorable responses. But I saw Ellen growing into the woman that I knew that she would be, and that she would make her own way in the world and in the work that she would do. Ellen was just recently appointed to a teaching position in Boston, and it was kindly Mrs. Brooks who wrote a letter of introduction for her to her friends in Boston. I know that as Ellen leaves her home, leaves Concord town, that she will travel, and wherever she goes, she will leave a legacy of the good work that she will do. Ellen, tonight we celebrate you. And to the people of Concord town, I proudly introduce to you my daughter, Ellen Garrison.
Thank you, Father, and thank you to all of you here tonight to have come to learn a bit about our lives in Concord and beyond. My life was built on the struggle of my grandfather, Caesar Robbins, my father, Jack Garrison, and the fierce passion for standing for what is right and for what is just, taught to me by my mother, Susan Garrison. Thanks to my mother and father, my brothers and sister were all fine students of the public school here in Concord. I developed a passion to teach others, and it took me from Concord to Boston and then further as I began to teach in schools in nearby Rhode Island. I then saw an opportunity as the War of the Rebellion raged to go and teach in the South. In June of 1863, I wrote this letter. Sir, I have a great desire to go and labor among the freedmen of the South. I think it is our duty as a people to spend our lives in trying to elevate our own race. Who can feel for us if we do not feel for ourselves? And who can feel the sympathy that we can who are not identified with them? I should like to go as soon as possible, for I feel as though there is much work to be done, and I would like to do my share. I would have gone upon my own responsibility, but I am not able, and the times being so unsettled, I thought it would not be safe for me to be employed by some society. Then I shall not be troubled about my livelihood, for it cramps one's energies to have to think about the means of living. I suppose I must tell you something of myself. I teach the common English branches: reading, writing, arithmetic, geography, and grammar. Should there be an opportunity for me to be employed, will you please inform me what the salary will be and all the particulars? I shall be ready to leave Newport as soon as I settle my present business. I have a select school, but I believe I can do more good among the freedmen. Please write to me if there is any prospect, and you will much oblige me. Yours most respectfully, E. Garrison Jackson. P.S. I was born in Concord, Mass. and am a member of the Baptist Church in Joy St. Boston. I was hired by the society and sent down to Port Deposit, Maryland, to open a school for freedmen. Here, I read you some of my letters about my time there running the school. Reverend S.S. Jocelyn, dear friend, I have got the school in good working order. The children are willing and anxious to learn. I have 31 scholars and expect more. My time has been very well occupied. In the evening, it is considered unsafe to go out, that is for colored people, for they are stoned and driven about at the pleasure of the rowdies. This seems somewhat strange to me, yet so it is. One man was badly injured last week and is now under the doctor's care. Please write word to Mr. Noyes about the books if you think that it will do any good. The want of school books is my greatest trouble. I hope to be able to visit my scholars and their parents also very soon. I have nothing more of interest, but shall write again after I get the books. Yours truly, E. Garrison Jackson. Reverend M.E. Strybey, sir, I send the report of my labors the past month. The chief obstacles which I have to encounter is the inconvenience of the schoolroom. It has nothing convenient about it. No desk on which the scholars can write, no desk for me to keep my books in, and but one seat with a back, and these we have all borrowed. The want of convenient seats and desks is a serious obstacle, for there are several who can write some, and there are others who ought to be learning. I have done all I could to have them get the desk, but it seems they have not been able to get them yet. My scholars are very good generally. Sometimes I had to deprive them of recess or keep them after the others are dismissed, but have had no serious cases yet. They listen to me and obey. One thing is certain, my scholars like me, and therefore they regard what I tell them. My methods of punishment are various. Sometimes I have them stand up until they are pretty tired. And then I have a bench, which I call the bad boy seat. And sometimes I have to rap their knuckles, but I think that they can easily be governed. There is one thing which I should like to say, and that is that the people here are generally free people, do not act as freed men. They are not like the northern free people. They are not yet accustomed to free laws and free speech and freedom. But they are anxious to learn and hope to go to school when work is not so brisk as it is now. Hoping that my report will prove satisfactory, I remain yours truly, E. Garrison Jackson. Reverend S. Hunt, enclosed, I send my monthly report for March. I hope it will be satisfactory. I have been enabled to make some little progress the past month. My scholars have been diligent and attentive and have improved with time. Many of them have left us at the end of the month to engage in the various pursuits of life. I saw them depart with regret, although our acquaintance had been very short, yet we had become attached to each other, and we parted reluctantly. It is a mistaken idea the people have here that they must take their children away after a few weeks teaching and send them out to work. I have not been able to induce but one man to continue to send his son in spite of work. And he is so small, he could do but little. Work, work, work is their motto, while mine is educate, educate, educate. Yours truly, E. G. Jackson. Rev. S. Hunt, dear friend, yours of the 3rd was received, and I will try to give you some faint idea of Port Deposit. I have generally walked through the streets unmolested. It is only occasionally that I have been beaten and stoned in the street by the boys, but my scholars are not so fortunate. They pelt them with missiles, frequently, so that the parents of some will not send them to school. I will narrate a little incident which befell me last 4th of July, which may give you some idea of their petty spite. I was walking with a friend on my way to a lecture to be delivered at Bethel Hall. We were walking along, very leisurely along, when someone came up behind me and trod on my dress, at the same time angrily exclaiming, "I wish you would not take up all of the sidewalk. Somebody else wants to walk as well as you," which I thought to be very likely. Accordingly, I stepped one side and politely told him he could pass by if he wished, waiting for him to do so. He then called me and told me he would not have any of my sass, and told me he would slap me in the mouth. At this point, I thought it best to interfere, having a particular regard for my mouth. I told him in a very decided manner he would not do it. He then passed on. I have found out one thing about these people. If they attack you, be careful to stand your ground, and they will leave you. But if you run, they will follow. I think I should hardly been able to walk the street, for if the boys had seen the least signs of fear, on the contrary, they had to run from me. And now they generally keep a respectful distance and content themselves with saying something to annoy me as I pass, which I do not notice. They are very anxious to find out what my scholars are learning at school and question them. One foreman in the mill nearby opposite called one of my boys to him and began to question him in geography, but got out of his latitude, for the boy had got ahead of him. I believe I have answered all your questions, and I hope they will be satisfactory. Yours truly, E. Garrison Jackson. In 1866, with the war over and rebels defeated, a Civil Rights Act was passed. The law allowed for us to no longer be discriminated against in places of public accommodation such as train and train stations. My friend, Miss Anderson, and I decided to take a stand. Dear friend, this is the first time that I've felt it to be my duty to make any serious complaint, but an outrage has just occurred which demands attention. It was nothing less than the foreseeable ejection of myself and Miss Anderson from the ladies' sitting room at the depot of the Philadelphia-Baltimore-Washington Railroad in the city of Baltimore. We made our way to the depot to take the 6 o'clock train from Harvard to Grace. We arrived at the depot at 5 minutes before 6 o'clock, took our seats in the ladies' room, from which we were thrown out. We were injured in our persons as well as our feelings, for it was with no gentle hand that we were assisted from that room, and I feel the effects of it still. I made up my mind to make a complaint to the sub of the Freedmen's Bureau General Standard, whose headquarters are at Baltimore. I did so in person. He said that it ought to be attended to. The general also told me that he would do all in his power. He also says he wishes to ascertain whether respectable people have rights which are to be respected. Thus, you see, it will be a question of much importance. It will not benefit us merely as such, but also it will be a stand for the others. I feel anxious to have your opinion. Just at this time, it appears to me a question of much importance. It is different from the past. We can now give evidence. Yours truly, E. Garrison Jackson. I was told that we needed to get witness to this outrage, and so we went back a second time to the train station and the ladies' waiting room. Sir, I have the pleasure of informing you that I have been successful in ascertaining the name of one witness, David Gold, who resides at 57 Mulberry Street. On leaving your office yesterday afternoon, we went directly to the depot. We arrived there about 10 minutes before 4 o'clock. Mr. Cornish asked me if I was going inside. I answered yes. I cannot stand out here. We were then in the street. We passed into the depot and I made my way to the ladies' room. I took my station near the table by the door. I had just time to take a glance at the occupants of the room when the female in charge came up to me and ordered me to leave the room, which of course I did not heed, as I considered that I was in the right place. She ordered me out several times and asked me if I was deaf, if I could not hear, and told me if I would not go, she would get someone to put me out. She then left the room, as I suppose to put her threat in execution. Meantime, I stood waiting as patiently and silently as possible for her reinforcements to arrive, but I waited in vain. They did not come when she called, and I remained until it was time for me to take the cars. I did not know, but these facts might be of use, as I was the only one whom she addressed in this insulting manner while I was in the room. Therefore, she did not treat me as she did the others present. I feel as though I ought to strive to maintain my rights. As long as our friends have passed a law for our protection, we ought to contend for our rights and let our friends see that we appreciate their efforts in our behalf. Hoping that I have not wearied your patience, I remain yours most respectfully, Mrs. E. Garrison Jackson. Our case went to court. I recount that in this letter. Reverend S. Hunt, dear friend, we went to Baltimore on Friday evening and presented ourselves at court on Saturday morning as requested. The case was not called. Our opponent's counsel consulted with ours and requested a compromise, which proposition, being unexpected by us, required consideration. We could not agree to compromise. The fact is, the case must be very much against them, or they would not want it disposed of in that way. The colored people of Baltimore came to our aid in a very unexpected manner. They said they would assist us with their money to continue the case, and by no means to give in, but test it and find out whether we have civil rights or not. They said it concerned them all, and we have pledged ourselves to go through. Our case is a good one to decide the question, for we did not resist in any other way than by retaining our seats. We did not once lose sight of our position, but maintained our dignity. In fact, I did not speak to the woman who first insulted us, and did not speak to Adam Smizer until he grasped my arm so tightly I felt compelled to cry out, "Let me alone, take your hands off me." That is all I said to him until after the assault, after which I told him he would hear from me again. I recollected that he had pretended to be a police officer. I turned towards him and, looking him full in the face, inquired of him whether he really was a police officer. He very distinctly told me it was none of my business. But as there seemed to be a difference of opinion in regard to that, I did not press the question. But to return to our Baltimore friends, they came up to hear the trial. The courtroom was crowded. I had no idea of the sensation it would create, and nothing short of a question like this would justify me, in my own opinion, in making such a public spectacle of myself. It certainly requires a great degree of moral courage to act in this matter. It is no trifling subject. Whether successful or unsuccessful, we must stand firm to the last. I know there is danger in the counties, but the same kind Father who has protected me until this time, I believe will continue to do so until the end. I feel that it is a good and glorious effort in which I am engaged. Our soldiers went forth with sword and bayonet to contend for right and justice. We cannot do that, but we contend against outrage and oppression wherever we find it, firmly standing and giving away for the rudest shocks. Yours truly, E. Garrison Jackson.
Good evening. This is an original poem that was specifically written for this evening. It's called Stand Up for Ellen. If there was a shot heard around the world, Concordians, today what would that sound be? Can Ellen Garrison become that iconic symbol and be the example of American liberty? Can the freedom fighters of the past still be alive in you and me? Can the social doors of our collective humanity be broken down and set people free? Ellen was buried in an unmarked grave. She taught education as an underground cause. She was defiant during the white-only days. She challenged standards. She challenged laws. Ellen Garrison Jackson Clark was the predecessor of Rosa Parks. She was born in Concord at the Robbins House. She taught African freedom on every route. Ellen was on a mission to elevate her race, an abolitionist of abolitionists whose vision was strong. As she traveled the country, she moved with grace by tapping into the energies of those old slave songs. Slavery and segregation was the condition she fought because it mangled and strangled black people with fear. As an educator, she brought this struggle into light. Her mission for freedom was simple and clear. As the granddaughter of a man enslaved, her inherited rights was to do this work. At the age of 12, she walked in the Concord parade. She was viewed with scorn, but needed to be heard. A good story is only compelling if it touches the mind. Do you remember the footsteps left behind in the sand? Great teachers should awaken and inspire the blind. It's not what they say, it's how they take a stand. Who are the black educators that we remember the most? Woodson, Rogers, Booker T, and Du Bois? Men are always selected for this sacred post. But what about Ellen? What about her voice? Social justice is a tool to correct wrongs that were done. Ellen Garrison was an advocate for civil rights. Her earliest activism began in this very town. Can you still hear her voice? Can you still see her fight? Why are people silent during the real cause? Why are these connections and relationships so rare? Why is it hard to see truth beyond the fraud? If we stand up for Ellen, we can't sit down in fear. If we stand up for Ellen, we must stand up for truth in education, community, and preparing the youth. If we stand up for Ellen, we must cut the ties loose by engaging in solidarity as an action of proof. If we stand up for Ellen, we must not be afraid of the judgment, opinions, and the scrutiny by the mob. By standing up for Ellen, we demonstrate that we're brave so that the next generation is not socially robbed.